Tonight, there is no hunt for miracles, no chase, no revelation, and no dramatic unveiling designed to shock or impress. This is a quiet walk among the fragments history left behind, where facts and legends rest side by side like smooth stones shaped slowly by time. It invites attention without urgency, offering calm curiosity instead of suspense, and gently asking the listener to stay. Some ancient objects appear strangely familiar to modern eyes. Bronze gears arranged with careful precision, concrete refusing to crumble after centuries, glass changing color as light passes through it. Recipes were guarded with seriousness usually reserved for family traditions and favorite sauces, not because they were magical, but because they worked. None of these achievements require imagination to exist, and none demand explanations that reach beyond human skill. They emerged from time, practiced hands, suitable materials, and a willingness to repeat the same motions until results became reliable. Modern impatience often mistakes this steady repetition for mystery, simply because it no longer remembers how long mastery takes. Here, patience does most of the work, while noise remains unnecessary. In this telling, each so-called lost technology is treated as a room rather than a riddle. We enter quietly, observe the objects, listen to the imagined sounds of tools, and notice what is actually present. Nothing is forced to perform, and nothing is asked to explain itself beyond the evidence it leaves behind. When a detail feels uncertain, it is set gently back in place, steady and upright, without tipping into fantasy. This approach does not diminish wonder, but allows it to exist without strain or exaggeration. Silence fills the gaps where records end, and silence often proves more honest than invention. The mind is permitted to drift slowly while still remaining grounded. This introduction moves slowly on purpose, because speed blurs detail, and detail is the thin line separating fact from decoration. Late-night history favors balance, letting the listener relax without losing footing. The technologies discussed do not shout or advertise themselves, and they do not require belief to remain real. They wait patiently, confident that careful attention will arrive eventually. With that understanding settled, the walk begins at a pace slow enough for sleep to follow naturally. Nothing needs to be proven tonight, only observed. History exhales, and the listener is invited to do the same. In this calm space, curiosity remains awake while urgency is gently set aside for the night, allowing thought to slow and settle without resistance or strain at last. Antikythera, the bronze machine that counted the sky. Among the confirmed achievements of the ancient world, the Antikythera mechanism occupies an unusually calm position. It does not need exaggeration, conspiracy, or rescue by imagination. It simply exists. A bronze machine recovered from a shipwreck near the Greek island of Antikythera, composed of interlocking gears designed to model astronomical cycles, with a level of mechanical sophistication that feels quietly uncomfortable to modern assumptions about the past. It does not shout its importance. It waits for attention and then rewards it slowly. When researchers first began to understand the device through modern imaging, the tone of the conversation shifted. This was not a symbolic object. It was not decorative. It was not a ritual token whose meaning could be endlessly debated. The internal structure revealed gear trains, ratios, inscriptions, and deliberate mechanical logic. The machine predicted cycles of the moon, tracked eclipses, and aligned celestial patterns with calendar systems. No speculation was required. The evidence spoke clearly. which is often the most unsettling outcome in archaeology. What makes the Antikythera mechanism remarkable is not that it feels modern, but that it refuses to behave like a novelty. There is no single dramatic feature to point at and declare impossible. Instead, there is accumulation. Gear after gear, calculation after calculation, knowledge layered patiently into bronze. This was not genius arriving in a flash. It was competence exercised repeatedly without hurry until precision emerged as a natural result. It is tempting, especially online, to treat the mechanism as proof that ancient people were secretly modern, or that advanced civilizations rose and fell without leaving other traces. This temptation says more about modern discomfort than ancient capability. The Antikythera mechanism does not suggest hidden lasers, lost power grids, or time travelers who forgot their batteries. It suggests workshops, long evenings, trial, error, and correction. It suggests people who were willing to be bored in pursuit of accuracy. Imagine the setting not as a temple or palace, but as a small workshop. Oil lamps burn steadily, producing more smoke than drama. Metal filings gather on the floor, swept aside and gathered again the next day. Someone adjusts a gear tooth with careful hands, testing its engagement, turning it slowly, listening for resistance. Turn, pause, turn again. Prediction is not guessed, it is earned. The mechanism's inscriptions reinforce this impression. They are not mystical, they are instructional. They explain cycles, intervals, expectations. This is a device meant to be used, not worshipped. It belongs to a culture comfortable with long-term observation of the sky, with tracking repetition across decades, with trusting patterns rather than miracles. The sky, after all, is patient. It rewards those willing to watch it longer than a single lifetime. There is something quietly ironic about how shocking this device feels today. We live surrounded by machines that calculate far more than the Antikythera mechanism ever could, yet we remain startled by the idea that ancient people could build something precise without electricity. The irony is gentle, almost polite. Precision does not require silicon. It requires time, feedback, and restraint. None of these are exclusive to modernity. The Antikythera mechanism also reveals something uncomfortable about historical narratives. We prefer progress to look like a straight line. We like inventions to arrive on schedule, each century checking off expected achievements. But history does not behave like a syllabus. Knowledge can appear, vanish, and reappear under different conditions. Complexity does not guarantee permanence. A society can build something extraordinary and then choose not to repeat it, or lose the conditions that made repetition worthwhile. This does not mean the knowledge was magical or fragile. It means it was contextual. The Antikythera mechanism required skilled metalworkers, mathematical understanding, astronomical interest, and social support for such a project. Remove any one of those, and the tradition thins. The machine does not represent a lost golden age. It represents a moment when several quiet competencies aligned. There is also a subtle humility embedded in the mechanism's design. It does not attempt to control the sky. It does not claim to influence celestial motion. It models. It reflects. It counts. This is not domination. It is observation translated into mechanics. The device acknowledges that the sky will do what it has always done, whether humans pay attention or not. The mechanism's role is simply to keep track, faithfully, without complaint. In a late-night telling, this matters. The Antikythera mechanism is not exciting in a loud way. It is exciting in the way a well-kept journal is exciting, or a map that turns out to be accurate, or a clock that does not drift. Its genius lies in reliability, not spectacle. It does not ask to be admired, it asks to be trusted. There is light humor here if one listens carefully. The mechanism has survived 2,000 years only to be greeted by a modern audience insisting it must be something else. Surely aliens, surely forbidden knowledge, surely a glitch in the timeline, and yet the device remains stubbornly practical. It continues to insist that careful people given enough time can produce astonishing results without needing to break reality. This quiet insistence is perhaps its most unsettling feature. The Antikythera mechanism does not flatter modern arrogance. It does not allow us to feel uniquely clever. Instead, it suggests continuity. It implies that intelligence has always existed, distributed unevenly, applied selectively, and often forgotten when circumstances change. The past is not simpler. It is merely less documented. In the end, the mechanism behaves like a clock, not only in function but in tone. Turn, pause, turn again. The motion is deliberate, predictable, comforting. Thought follows the same rhythm when allowed to slow. There is no need to rush to conclusions, no need to inflate mystery. The machine has already told its story, quietly, in bronze. And as the night deepens, the Antikythera mechanism offers an unexpected lesson, not about ancient superiority or lost brilliance, but about attention, about what becomes possible when patience is treated as a tool rather than an obstacle, when repetition is embraced rather than avoided, when understanding is allowed to grow slowly without demanding spectacle. The sky continues its cycles whether we watch or not. The moon does not care about reputation. Eclipses arrive on schedule without asking permission. The Antikythera mechanism simply acknowledged this reality and built something that could keep up. No drama, no miracle, just a machine that counted the sky, one careful turn at a time, and then waited quietly for centuries, content to be understood whenever someone was finally patient enough to listen. Roman concrete, buildings that learned how to age. Gracefully. Roman concrete survives not because it was perfect, but because it was allowed to age. This distinction matters more than it first appears. Modern materials often aim for permanence through resistance. They try to freeze a structure at the moment of completion, locking it into an ideal state and hoping time will leave it untouched. Roman concrete chose a different relationship with time. It did not fight aging. It collaborated with it. Quietly, patiently, and with surprisingly good results. For centuries, Roman structures have stood exposed to salt air, heat, rain, earthquakes, and human interference, while many modern buildings crack, spall, and demand repair within decades. This contrast has inspired dramatic explanations, lost formulas, secret ingredients, forgotten genius. But the truth is less theatrical and far more instructive. Roman builders did not invent immortality, they invented resilience. And resilience is always calmer than ambition. Modern research into Roman concrete reveals that its durability comes from specific choices in materials and process rather than any single miraculous component. Lime, volcanic ash, water, heat, and time interacted in ways that modern builders often avoid. The Romans mixed their concrete hot, not cool. They accepted imperfections. They allowed internal chemical reactions to continue long after construction ended. In short, they built structures that expected to change. Volcanic ash, particularly from regions near Pozzuoli, introduced reactive minerals into the mix. When combined with lime and water, these minerals formed complex crystalline structures. Over time, when cracks appeared, water infiltrated the concrete and triggered further reactions. Instead of weakening the structure, these reactions produced new mineral growth that filled gaps and reinforced bonds. The building did not panic when it cracked. It responded. This behavior feels unsettling to modern sensibilities. We are accustomed to materials that degrade when exposed. Cracks are failures. Water intrusion is a threat. Maintenance schedules exist because structures are expected to decay unless constantly managed. Roman concrete reversed this logic. It accepted water as a collaborator. Moisture was not an enemy. It was a continuation of the building process. The humor here is subtle and slightly embarrassing. Romans did not just build walls and harbors. They taught buildings how to take care of themselves, quietly, without inspections, without emergency repairs, without laminated safety notices. The concrete did its work in silence, adjusting internally while generations passed overhead, unaware that chemistry was still on duty. This does not suggest that Roman builders understood atomic theory or crystal lattices in a modern sense. It suggests something more grounded. They observed results. They noticed which structures lasted. They repeated what worked and abandoned what failed. Knowledge accumulated not through abstract modeling, but through experience layered across centuries. Their technology was empirical, not mystical. Roman concrete was not uniform across the empire. Recipes varied depending on local materials and intended use. Harbor concrete differed from road concrete. Foundations differed from domes. This flexibility is often overlooked in favor of a single mythical formula. But adaptability is a sign of maturity, not inconsistency. Roman builders did not force materials to behave identically everywhere. They listened to local conditions and adjusted accordingly. The Pantheon's dome is often cited as an example of Roman brilliance, but its success lies not only in geometry. The concrete itself changes density as the dome rises, becoming lighter toward the top. This was not decorative. It was practical. Weight mattered. Balance mattered. Longevity mattered. The structure behaves less like a static monument and more like a carefully negotiated agreement between gravity and patience. It is tempting to frame Roman concrete as superior to modern concrete, but this comparison misses the point. Modern concrete is optimized for speed, predictability, and cost. Roman concrete was optimized for endurance and adaptation. These priorities are not interchangeable. A civilization building rapidly across continents values different traits than one building for permanence. Roman concrete reflects a worldview that accepted time as an active participant. There is an unsettling implication here. Roman builders may not have aimed to outperform the future. They may not have cared whether their structures lasted 2,000 years. They built for usefulness, stability, and reliability within their own context. The longevity we admire may be a side effect of restraint rather than ambition. Buildings that do not rush often last longer. Late at night, when the noise of technological triumph fades, Roman concrete feels less like a lost technology and more like a quiet rebuke. It asks uncomfortable questions. Why do we expect materials to remain unchanged? Why do we treat aging as failure rather than process? Why do we design structures that require constant intervention instead of gradual self-correction? Roman concrete does not promise perfection. It accepts flaws early and corrects them slowly. Cracks form, then heal. Stress accumulates, then redistributes. The structure breathes in its own mineral way. This is not magic. It is chemistry, allowed to continue working without interruption. The Romans did not freeze their buildings in time. They gave them room to respond. The irony deepens when considering modern engineering capabilities. We can model stresses precisely. We can simulate decay. We can predict failure points decades in advance. And yet we often choose materials that age poorly because they align better with economic cycles, construction timelines, and aesthetic expectations. Roman concrete did not optimize for quarterly reports. It optimized for calm continuity. There is something deeply late night about this realization. The idea that the past was not secretly advanced but quietly patient. That durability emerged not from dominance over materials, but from cooperation with them. That chemistry once set in motion was trusted to do its work without constant supervision. Roman builders stepped back and let time participate. The concrete itself becomes a metaphor, not rigid, not frozen, but responsive. It ages gracefully because it was designed to age at all. Modern structures often fear aging. Roman structures anticipated it. This difference in attitude changes everything. In the end, Roman concrete does not demand admiration. It does not announce superiority. It simply continues existing, adjusting internally, unbothered by attention. It stands in ports, foundations, and ruins, quietly reminding us that endurance is often the result of humility rather than brilliance. As thoughts slow, the lesson settles. The Romans did not defeat time, they made peace with it. And in doing so, they created buildings that learned how to grow older without complaint, without drama, and without ever needing to explain themselves. The Lycurgus cup, glass that changes its mind about color. The Lycurgus cup is a late Roman glass vessel dating to the 4th century, a time when the empire still believed permanence was something that could be engineered through repetition, tradition, and attention to detail. At first glance, the cup appears unremarkable, a finely carved drinking vessel decorated with a dramatic relief scene. Its reputation, however, comes not from shape or story, but from behavior. When light reflects off its surface, the glass appears green. When light passes through it, the same glass shifts into a deep translucent red. The object does not transform suddenly or theatrically. The change happens quietly, as though the cup is reconsidering itself. This effect is known today as dichroism, a property in which material displays different colors depending on how light interacts with it. In the case of the Lycurgus cup, the phenomenon occurs because the glass contains microscopic particles of gold and silver distributed throughout the material. These particles interact with light in ways that alter how wavelengths scatter and pass through the glass. The science behind this effect is well understood today, but the experience of encountering it remains gently disorienting. The cup does not glow. It does not sparkle. It simply changes its mind. There is a temptation to describe this object using modern vocabulary, particularly words associated with advanced science. Terms like nanotechnology often appear in popular descriptions as if labeling the process with a contemporary name somehow increases its importance. This temptation is unnecessary. The artisans who produced the Lycurgus cup were not thinking in terms of particles and wavelengths. They were thinking in terms of mixtures, temperatures, timing, and experience. Their knowledge was practical, embodied, and cumulative. It existed in hands rather than formulas. The craftsmanship behind the cup was refined through repetition rather than theory. Glassmakers of the Roman world worked with complex recipes involving silica, metal oxides, and controlled heating. Small variations in composition produced noticeable changes in color and clarity. Over time, artisans learned what combinations behaved in interesting ways, even if they did not describe those behaviors in scientific language. The Lycurgus cup represents a point where curiosity, accident, and skill aligned particularly well. What makes the object feel magical is not its complexity, but the invisibility of its cause. Nothing on the surface announces the presence of gold or silver. The particles are too small to see, too evenly distributed to suggest intentional decoration. The effect reveals itself only through interaction, requiring movement, light, and patience. In this sense, the cup rewards attention rather than analysis. It performs best when observed slowly. Imagine a quiet room at night. The cup rests on a table, unbothered by interpretation. The air is still. A single lamp sits nearby, its flame or filament steady. As the lamp is moved closer, the glass responds. Green softens into red. The transition is gradual, almost hesitant, like a long breath taken without urgency. No explanation interrupts the moment. None is required. The change speaks for itself. There is humor here, subtle and dry. The cup behaves like a contrarian, refusing to settle on one identity. It offers different answers depending on how it is approached. Light from outside suggests one personality. Light from within reveals another. The object seems to imply that perspective matters, though it never says so out loud. It simply changes color and waits. The Roman world produced many remarkable objects, but few feel as quietly confident as this one. The Lycurgus cup does not advertise its cleverness. It does not need to prove anything. Its function is ordinary. It holds liquid. Its decoration is theatrical, but common enough for elite tableware. The color change is an incidental feature, emerging from materials chosen for other reasons. That incidental quality is part of its charm. This was not a technology designed to astonish crowds. It was not a demonstration piece meant to announce progress. It was likely commissioned as a luxury item, intended to be used, handled, and appreciated over time. The color shift may have been noticed gradually, becoming a familiar curiosity rather than a spectacle. Guests might have remarked on it quietly. Owners might have smiled when the light changed. No one needed to gasp. From a late-night perspective, the Lycurgus cup represents a category of ancient technology that feels lost only because modern thinking expects intention where there was often experimentation. The glassmakers did not set out to create a dichroic effect in the modern sense. They set out to make beautiful glass, and in doing so, they allowed materials to behave according to their nature. The result survived because it was stable, not because it was mysterious. The survival of the cup also reminds us how much ancient knowledge persists silently. The techniques used to produce such glass did not vanish overnight. They faded gradually as Economic systems shifted, workshops closed, and traditions broke. Skills require continuity, and continuity requires repetition. When repetition ends, even effective methods drift into obscurity without ceremony. There is something calming about this realization. Technologies do not always disappear because they are forbidden, destroyed, or misunderstood. Often, they simply stop being practiced. The Lycurgus cup remains because it was finished, used, and preserved. Many similar objects likely existed, and many were lost, melted down, or discarded when tastes changed. Survival does not always correlate with importance. In a calm telling, the cup becomes less about what was lost and more about what was briefly achieved and quietly set aside. It demonstrates that ancient artisans were capable of remarkable control over materials without needing to explain that control abstractly. Their understanding lived in routine, muscle memory, and careful observation. Late at night, this is an easy object to sit with. It does not demand belief. It does not challenge timelines. It does not threaten modern identity. It simply behaves as it always has, changing color when light behaves differently. The mind can follow this behavior without effort, drifting between green and red, reflection and transmission, surface and depth. The Lycurgus cup does not shout across centuries. It does not claim superiority or mystery. It waits quietly in museum light, repeating the same performance it offered long ago. In doing so, it reminds us that beauty does not require exaggeration, and skill does not require spectacle. Sometimes, the most unsettling thing is how calm mastery can look. As the room darkens again, and the lamp is moved away, the color settles. The glass returns to green. Nothing has been revealed. Nothing has been hidden. The cup rests unchanged, confident that its presence alone is enough. Damascus steel, patterns forged through repetition. Historical blades associated with Damascus steel earned their reputation slowly, not through spectacle, but through use. These weapons became known for their flowing surface patterns and dependable performance, qualities that emerged from material behavior rather than secret formulas, whispered in dark rooms. To the modern imagination, Damascus steel often appears wrapped in myth, but its origins lie in repetition, consistency, and long familiarity with heat, metal, and timing. The steel did not become famous because it was mysterious. It became famous because it worked again and again, under conditions where failure was remembered clearly. The patterns themselves were never decoration alone. They formed naturally as a result of forging processes and the composition of the metal. In many historical examples, the steel was derived from crucible methods, often linked to Wootz steel produced in South Asia and traded across regions. The patterns emerged as bands and swirls, not because someone decided they looked elegant, but because carbon distribution, cooling rates, and mechanical working allowed certain structures to appear. The blade revealed its internal history on its surface, like wood grain quietly recording the life of a tree. Modern materials science has provided explanations for these characteristics. Microscopic analysis suggests that carbides, such as cementite, formed in distinctive arrangements within the steel, contributing to both pattern and performance. These structures influenced hardness, flexibility, and edge retention, all without the smith needing to name them or understand them abstractly. Knowledge was practical, inherited through practice rather than theory. The forge functioned as both classroom and laboratory, though no one would have used either word. Despite modern fascination, the historical reality was unromantic. Producing such steel required consistent access to specific ores, reliable fuel, stable trade routes, and uninterrupted teaching traditions. When any of these elements failed, the chain weakened. The technology did not vanish in a dramatic collapse. It faded. Workshops closed. Routes shifted. Teachers aged. Students learned something else. Skills that depended on repetition simply stopped repeating. This quiet disappearance often feels unsatisfying to modern audiences. There is a preference for stories involving destruction, secrecy, or conspiracy. Damascus steel offers none of these. It declined because conditions changed. Economic pressures, political instability, and disrupted supply chains all played their roles. Without the right materials, the process could not continue. Without continuous practice, the subtleties were lost. Steel that once behaved predictably began to behave differently, and smiths adapted rather than insisted. The humor in this story is understated. A legendary material spoken of with reverence centuries later was originally just good steel, made by people who paid attention. There was no announcement when the last blade of its kind was forged. No one paused to say that something important had ended. They simply finished the day's work and did something else the next day. In a late-night telling, the forge becomes central. The glow is steady, not dramatic. The fire breathes gently. Hammer strikes follow a rhythm that does not hurry. The smith listens to sound, watches color, and feels resistance through the tool. Metal responds honestly to heat and pressure, never exaggerating its intentions. It bends when allowed, hardens when cooled, and cracks only when pushed beyond tolerance. There is no mystery here, only consequence. The smith does not speak much. Speech is unnecessary. Observation carries more information than explanation. A slight change in color suggests readiness. A different sound signals adjustment. The work proceeds without commentary, guided by experience rather than instruction. In this environment, knowledge is stored in muscle memory and instinct, not diagrams or equations. From a modern distance, Damascus steel feels lost because it cannot be recreated reliably without reconstructing entire historical systems. Attempting to replicate it in isolation often misses the point. The steel was part of a network. Materials came from specific places. Fuels burned at particular temperatures. Cooling occurred in certain climates. Remove any element, and the result changes. What appears lost is not a recipe, but a context. This realization softens the legend. The steel was never magical. It was simply supported by circumstances that no longer exist in the same configuration. Modern metallurgy can surpass its performance easily, yet still fails to reproduce its character exactly. Not because modern science lacks understanding, but because it operates under different priorities. Efficiency replaced patience. Scale replaced repetition. There is something gently ironic about this. Technologies now vanish quickly because they are replaced. Damascus steel vanished because it was no longer sustainable. It required too much stability in a world that was becoming less predictable. The steel did not adapt. People did. As the night deepens, the forge scene becomes quieter. The blade cools slowly. Patterns emerge as the surface oxidizes and contracts. The result is neither miraculous nor disappointing. It is simply finished. The blade will cut, flex, and endure until it eventually wears down like everything else. Damascus steel survives today mostly as an idea, shaped by retelling rather than use. Modern reproductions imitate appearance more than process. They satisfy curiosity without restoring context. This is not failure. It is honesty. Some things belong to their time because that time allowed them to exist. In the calmest reading, Damascus steel teaches restraint. It reminds us that technology is not a straight line. Skills do not always improve. They depend on systems that can quietly dissolve. When they do, what remains is memory, pattern, and myth, layered thinly over practical reality. As the forge cools completely, there is no sense of loss, only completion. The hammer rests, the fire dims, the steel lies still. Its patterns remain visible, not demanding explanation. They speak softly of repetition, attention, and a world that moved slowly enough for mastery to become normal. Greek fire, knowledge that was never meant to be shared. Greek fire was not a miracle, and it was never treated as one by the people who controlled it. It was a system carefully maintained, tightly regulated, and intentionally obscured. Known for its ability to burn on water, it became one of the most unsettling tools of the Byzantine world. Not because it defied nature, but because it obeyed a specific combination of materials, methods, and discipline. The fire did not appear suddenly, and it did not belong to anyone who spoke freely about it. Unlike many ancient technologies that faded due to neglect or economic change, Greek fire followed a different path. Its disappearance was deliberate. The formula was protected with extraordinary caution, never written down in a complete and open form. What remains today are descriptions, second-hand accounts, and fragments that hint at how it behaved without explaining how it was made. The knowledge was not lost through ignorance. It was lost through silence. This was not secrecy for the sake of mystery. It was secrecy as policy. Greek fire represented a strategic advantage, and advantages were not shared. Workshops where the substance was prepared were sealed environments. Access was limited. Components were referred to indirectly or left unnamed entirely. Even those involved in production likely understood only parts of the process, enough to perform their role, but not enough to reconstruct the whole. Knowledge was compartmentalized, divided carefully like rations. In this system, tradition mattered more than explanation. Instructions were given as actions rather than reasons. Do this. Do not do that. Heat until it looks like this. Stop when it sounds like that. There was no incentive to ask why, and no permission to explore alternatives. Curiosity was not rewarded. Reliability was. Descriptions of Greek fire emphasize its behavior rather than its composition. It ignited fiercely. It clung. It resisted water. These qualities impressed observers and terrified opponents, but they did not clarify the mechanism. Accounts often focused on effect because effect was what mattered. The method remained backstage, unseen, protected by layers of routine and silence. Modern attempts to reconstruct Greek fire rely on educated guesses. Scholars suggest combinations involving petroleum products, resins, sulfur, quicklime, or other combustible substances. None of these proposals can be confirmed with certainty. The point, however, is not the recipe. The point is the system that prevented the recipe from becoming common knowledge. Greek fire existed within a culture that understood the value of restricted information. Not all knowledge was meant to circulate. Some knowledge was meant to stay still, guarded by walls, oaths, and habit. The Byzantine state treated technical expertise as an asset to be contained, not celebrated. There were no manuals distributed widely. There were no apprentices encouraged to innovate. There was only continuity. There is a subtle irony here. Modern audiences often assume that secrecy preserves knowledge. In the short term, it does. In the long term, it can suffocate it. Greek fire survived as long as the institutions that guarded it remained stable. When those institutions weakened, the knowledge had nowhere else to go. It had not been allowed to travel, and therefore, it could not escape. In a late-night telling, the scene shifts away from battlefields and toward workshops. The doors remain closed. Inside, the air smells sharp and heavy. Containers sit unlabeled. Instructions are spoken quietly, if at all. Each person knows only what is necessary. The process repeats, unchanged, because change introduces risk. There is a dry humor in this rigidity, a technology so carefully protected that it forgot how to survive outside its own cage. Greek fire was never weak. It was simply overprotected. Like a family recipe locked in a drawer that no one is allowed to copy. It remains perfect until the last person who knows it decides to stop cooking. The disappearance of Greek fire did not come with an announcement. There was no moment when someone realized the formula had vanished. The system likely degraded gradually. Skilled individuals died. Training was interrupted, supplies became harder to secure. At some point, repeating the process became unreliable, and reliability was the only thing that mattered. Once reliability was gone, the fire lost its value. A weapon that behaves unpredictably is no longer an advantage, it becomes a liability, and so it was set aside. The sealed workshops fell quiet. The containers emptied or were discarded. The names were never written down, so they could not be rediscovered. This is how some knowledge ends. Not in flames, but in paperwork never filed, in instructions never repeated, in habits that quietly stop being practiced. Greek fire did not vanish because it was disproven, it vanished because it was isolated. From a modern perspective, this story feels unsettling. It challenges the assumption that secrecy guarantees preservation. It suggests instead that knowledge needs circulation to survive. Greek fire had power, but no resilience. It depended entirely on a narrow corridor of continuity. It becomes a reminder that control has a cost. Knowledge that is never shared eventually runs out of people to remember it. When memory ends, so does method. The irony remains gentle but persistent. A substance famous for burning on water was ultimately extinguished by stillness. No invasion was required, no theft occurred. Silence did the work efficiently. In this calm retelling, Greek fire is not a lost miracle. It is a lesson in restraint taken too far. It shows how systems designed for protection can accidentally ensure disappearance. The formula did not escape. It did exactly what it was told. It stayed where it was placed. As the final embers fade in imagination, there is no explosion, only quiet. Workshops remain closed. The knowledge rests undisturbed, exactly as intended. And with that, the story ends without urgency, leaving behind not mystery, but the slow certainty that some things disappear simply because they were never allowed to live anywhere else. The Baghdad Battery, when imagination arrives before evidence. The object known as the Baghdad battery does not look impressive at first glance. It is small, ceramic, and quiet, the kind of thing that might easily be overlooked on a shelf of broken vessels and forgotten tools. There are no inscriptions declaring its purpose. No dramatic materials catch the light. No obvious signs announce that it once powered anything at all. And yet, few archaeological artifacts have generated as much speculative excitement with so little physical insistence. Discovered near Baghdad in the 1930s, the object consists of a clay jar containing a copper cylinder and an iron rod. That arrangement alone was enough to awaken modern imaginations. Copper, iron, contained, isolated. To eyes trained by batteries, circuits, and voltage, the shape feels familiar. It resembles something we already know how to name. And when modern minds encounter familiar shapes in unfamiliar contexts, interpretation tends to move faster than evidence. The suggestion arrived quickly. Ancient electricity. Theories followed eagerly. Perhaps the device was used for electroplating. Perhaps it powered ritual objects now lost. Perhaps ancient Mesopotamians understood electrical principles long before modern science acknowledged them. The object did not argue. It sat silently, allowing projection to do most of the work. This is where the story becomes less about the artifact and more about the observer. The Baghdad battery does not generate certainty. It generates possibility, and possibility, when paired with modern technological confidence, can feel irresistible. We like the idea that knowledge moves in secret cycles, that ancient people were quietly advanced, that history forgot something important. The battery shape provides just enough structure for this fantasy to stand upright. Archaeological consensus, however, remains unconvinced. Not hostile, not dismissive, simply unconvinced. There are no wires, no devices that require power, no consistent chemical residue confirming repeated electrical use, no workshop context suggesting energy production. The object exists, but its supposed ecosystem does not. Technologies rarely appear alone. Tools come with companions. Electricity requires systems, conductors, insulation, purpose. A battery without a circuit is not a battery. It is a container with metals inside it. That distinction is less exciting, but far more responsible. In the late-night telling, responsibility matters more than thrill. The Baghdad battery invites us to slow down and sit with uncertainty, to notice how quickly imagination fills silence, to observe how suggestion becomes conviction when repeated often enough. The object itself remains stubbornly quiet. It does not hum. It does not glow. It does not insist that it once powered anything. It does not even insist that it mattered. That restraint is unsettling. We are accustomed to artifacts declaring their use through wear, damage, or pattern. This one does not. It waits. Some experiments have shown that if acidic liquid is added, the jar can produce a small voltage. This fact is often presented triumphantly, as if possibility equals intention. But many objects can produce voltage under manipulated conditions. That does not mean they were designed for it. A potato can generate electricity. No one suggests ancient agriculture was secretly electrical engineering. The humor here is gentle and unavoidable. We tend to congratulate ourselves for imagining ancient intelligence while quietly ignoring that imagination is doing most of the labor. The artifact itself contributes very little to the argument. It is suggestive, not demonstrative. It looks like something we want it to be. In this sense, the Baghdad battery functions as a mirror. It reflects modern expectations back at us. We see electricity because electricity dominates our world. We see batteries because batteries are everywhere. If we lived in a different technological moment, we might see something else entirely. A storage jar, a ritual container, a symbolic object, a failed experiment, or simply a thing whose purpose did not require explanation. Context matters. Archaeology depends on patterns, not isolated shapes. And here the pattern is missing. No powered artifacts exist nearby. No metal-plated objects show signs of electrochemical treatment. No textual references hint at electrical concepts. The silence is broad and consistent. That silence does not mean ignorance, it means restraint. Archaeologists are trained to resist narrative when evidence does not cooperate. This is less glamorous than speculation, but far more reliable. The Baghdad battery remains an open question, not because experts are blind, but because the object refuses to answer clearly. In the quiet of late-night history, this refusal feels appropriate. Not every artifact needs a dramatic role. Some exist at the edge of understanding. They remind us that uncertainty is not failure. It is a condition. The jar rests on a desk in the mind's eye. It looks suggestive. The metals catch a little light. The imagination leans forward eagerly. Evidence leans back. Neither wins. The object remains exactly what it is. This tension is where the real story lives. The Baghdad battery teaches us less about ancient electricity and more about modern desire. We want wonder. We want rediscovery. We want proof that history hid something from us. The artifact offers just enough ambiguity to keep that desire alive. But archaeology is not obligated to satisfy longing. Its task is quieter: to observe, to compare, to wait. The Baghdad battery has been waiting for nearly a century, unchanged by the stories told about it. It does not benefit from belief. It does not suffer from skepticism. Late at night, when certainty feels heavy and mystery feels light, the object becomes oddly comforting. It does not rush to explain itself. It does not resolve into narrative. It remains unresolved and therefore honest. There is something deeply unsettling about that honesty. We are used to answers. We prefer conclusions. The Baghdad battery offers neither. It offers shape without function, familiarity without confirmation. It invites pause. And perhaps that is its quiet value. Not as evidence of lost technology, but as evidence of restraint. It reminds us that imagination should arrive after evidence, not before. That suggestion is not the same as proof, that some objects are allowed to remain uncertain. The battery never sparks. The jar never lights anything. The artifact does not change the world. But it does slow the conversation. It encourages listening rather than declaring. In that slowing, history becomes less about spectacle and more about patience. The Baghdad battery does not tell us what ancient people knew. It tells us what modern people hope. And in that gap between hope and proof, something important happens. We are forced to sit with not knowing. The object remains quiet. The evidence remains quiet. The imagination eventually grows tired. And when it does, the jar is still there, unchanged, waiting without concern. In the end, the Baghdad battery is not a failed answer. It is a successful question, one that continues to remind us gently and persistently that history does not owe us astonishment. Sometimes it offers uncertainty instead, and asks us to rest there without forcing meaning where none is required. Aeolipile, steam that learned how to spin. The Aeolipile enters history quietly, without smoke-filled factories or pounding pistons. It does not arrive dragging the future behind it. Instead, it appears as a polished metal sphere, balanced delicately, responding to steam with a simple, elegant spin. Described by Heron of Alexandria in the 1st century, the device demonstrates something remarkable with almost no ambition at all. Water is heated, steam escapes, motion appears, and then, just as calmly, it stops. To modernize, the Aeolipile feels like a missed opportunity. Steam power, centuries before the Industrial Revolution, sitting politely on a scholar's table, doing nothing with its potential. It invites the inevitable question: why did no one take this further? Why did the ancient world not build engines, factories, railways, or revolutions around this principle? The Aeolipile seems to whisper that history paused when it could have accelerated. But this question reveals more about modern impatience than ancient limitation. The Aeolipile was never designed to change the world. It was designed to explain it. Heron did not build a prototype for industry. He built a demonstration, a way to show that heat could become motion, that invisible forces could be guided, that nature could be persuaded to perform on cue. It was an object of understanding, not exploitation. In the late-night telling, this distinction matters. The Aeolipile is not a failure. It is a success within the boundaries it was given. Steam hisses softly inside the vessel. Jets release pressure. The sphere rotates, not urgently, but obediently. There is something almost playful about it. A toy, perhaps, but a serious one. The kind of toy that explains a rule rather than breaking it. Heron lived in a world that valued spectacle, philosophy, and controlled wonder. His writings describe devices that opened temple doors automatically, statues that poured wine, and mechanisms that responded to fire and air. These were not industrial tools. They were demonstrations of principle, proof that the universe followed rules that could be understood, anticipated, and repeated. The Aeolipile fits neatly into this tradition. It converts thermal energy into kinetic energy, yes, but it does so without ambition. It spins because it can, not because it must. The device does not demand scaling. It does not suggest infrastructure. It simply shows a relationship. Heat becomes movement. Pressure becomes rotation. End of lesson. The humor gently applied lies in our disappointment. We look at the Aeolipile and feel cheated, as if history owed us progress sooner, as if the ancient world missed an obvious upgrade. But nothing about Heron's context required such a leap. There was no economic pressure to replace labor, no cultural obsession with efficiency, no demand for constant expansion. The Aeolipile answered a question that had already been asked. It did not ask new ones. In modern terms, the Aeolipile behaves like a proof of concept that never entered production. But production was not the goal. Understanding was. The device sits comfortably in a lineage of thought experiments made physical. It allows the observer to see cause and effect without abstraction. Steam moves, metal responds, the mind follows. Late at night, this simplicity feels almost radical. There is no optimization, no scaling, no promise of disruption, just a principle made visible, steam that learned how to spin and then politely stopped. It is tempting to imagine an alternate timeline, one where Heron's device sparked a chain reaction, where workshops replaced amphitheaters, where steam engines roared centuries early. But this fantasy assumes that invention naturally seeks domination. In reality, invention follows intention. Heron's intention was explanation, not transformation. The Aeolipile also reminds us that knowledge does not automatically demand application. Understanding something does not obligate its exploitation. The ancient world understood gears, hydraulics, pneumatics, and leverage. It used them where appropriate. It did not feel compelled to reorganize society around them. There is a quiet confidence in that restraint. The Aeolipile demonstrates power without urgency. It moves, but it does not insist. It offers possibility without demand. In this way, it feels unsettling to modern sensibilities which equate unused potential with failure. The device itself is almost shy, a hollow sphere mounted on pivots, fed by a simple boiler. When heated, steam escapes through bent nozzles, causing rotation through reaction force. The physics are clean. The effect is undeniable, and yet the room does not change. The world continues exactly as before. This lack of consequence is the point. The Aeolipile is not an engine waiting to be unleashed. It is a lesson waiting to be observed. Once observed, it rests. In sleep version storytelling, the Aeolipile becomes an image rather than an argument. Steam rises gently, metal warms. The sphere begins to turn slowly at first, then with quiet confidence. There is no noise beyond the hiss, no labor replaced, no future rewritten, just motion appearing where stillness was. The unsettling part is how complete this feels. There is nothing missing, no frustration inside the device, no unrealized destiny. The Aeolipile does exactly what it was meant to do. Our discomfort comes from wanting it to do more. This reveals a deeper habit. We tend to measure past intelligence by how closely it resembles our own priorities. When ancient inventions do not lead to modern outcomes, we assume something was lost or wasted. But perhaps nothing was missing at all. Perhaps the Aeolipile existed fully within its moment, answering the questions that mattered then. Heron did not need factories to validate his insight. He needed demonstration. The Aeolipile delivered that with elegance. It showed that energy could move matter without direct contact, that invisible forces could be harnessed, that understanding could be embodied. And then it stopped. Steam cooled. Motion ended. The lesson remained. Late at night, the Aeolipile feels less like a prelude and more like a pause, a reminder that not all discoveries are meant to escalate. Some exist to settle curiosity, not inflame it. The device does not argue for progress. It does not demand continuation. It simply spins briefly and then rests. In that rest, it leaves behind something quieter than revolution. Comprehension. The ancient world did not fail to industrialize steam. It chose not to. Or more accurately, it had no reason to. The Aeolipile was sufficient. It explained what needed explaining. Anything more would have been excess. There is something almost comforting in that restraint. A sense that knowledge can exist without urgency. That understanding does not have to accelerate history. That invention can be gentle. As the steam fades and the sphere slows, the Aeolipile becomes still again. Not broken, not abandoned. Complete. And in that completeness, it offers a final, unsettling thought. Perhaps progress is not always about what could be done next. Perhaps sometimes it is about knowing when to stop. The Aeolipile teaches steam how to spin. It teaches us how to pause. Patterns that repeat across civilizations. When knowledge prefers to rest. Across civilizations that never met, never traded, and never shared a common language, the same pattern appears with quiet consistency. Technologies do not arrive suddenly, fully formed, or revolutionary by intention. They grow slowly from familiarity with materials, from hands that repeat the same motions long enough to stop thinking about them. Stone yields to those who understand stone. Metal responds to those who listen to heat. Wood bends for those who know when not to force it. This pattern does not belong to one culture. It belongs to human attention stretched over time. When modern audiences speak of lost technologies, the phrase often carries a sense of catastrophe, as if something dramatic occurred, as if fire swept through workshops or invaders smashed delicate machines or libraries burned while secrets screamed into the air. The truth, far more often, is quieter and less satisfying. Technologies usually fade the way habits fade. One season passes without repetition, another follows. The hands that knew what to do are busy elsewhere. The skill sleeps. Nothing breaks. Nothing is stolen. It is simply not practiced again. This is deeply unsettling to modern expectations. We prefer stories with villains. We like disappearance to have an explanation loud enough to justify our disappointment. Quiet abandonment feels insufficient. Yet history offers very little evidence that most technologies were lost violently. They were set down gently and not picked up again. Across the ancient world, techniques lived inside bodies rather than books. Knowledge was carried in posture, timing, and muscle memory. A mason did not consult a manual to understand stone. A glassmaker did not diagram heat. They learned by watching, copying, and failing slowly until failure stopped happening. This kind of knowledge is durable only when repetition continues. Once repetition ends, the knowledge does not die. It simply goes dormant. Dormant knowledge is difficult to recognize. Archaeology finds results, not routines. We uncover finished objects and assume the process behind them was fixed, standardized, and permanent. In reality, many techniques survived only because they were used often enough to justify remembering. When conditions changed, remembering no longer mattered. Consider how many technologies depend on a narrow balance of environment, culture, and need. Remove one element and the technique becomes unnecessary. Remove two, and it becomes inconvenient. Remove all three, and it becomes forgettable. The technology has not failed. The world around it has moved on. There is a quiet irony here. Modern society believes that documentation preserves knowledge indefinitely. Yet even today, skills disappear despite abundant recording. Techniques for repairing obsolete machines vanish. Crafts survive only in small communities. Software becomes unreadable within decades. Information exists, but fluency does not. Knowing about a thing is not the same as knowing how to do it. Ancient civilizations understood this intuitively. They did not attempt to preserve every technique forever. They preserved what mattered at the time. When priorities shifted, techniques followed. Knowledge obeyed attention. This explains why the same kinds of technologies appear independently across civilizations. Pottery, metallurgy, basic mechanics, astronomical observation. These are not mysteries passed secretly from culture to culture. They are responses to materials encountered repeatedly. Clay invites shaping, metal invites melting, the sky invites counting. Given enough time and patience, similar solutions emerge. What differs is not intelligence, but emphasis. Some cultures invest heavily in durability, others in precision, others in symbolism. Technologies reflect values before they reflect capability. A society that values continuity will build differently than one that values expansion. Neither is superior. They simply prioritize different outcomes. Loss, therefore, does not always mean regression. Sometimes it means relief. A technique that required constant attention may no longer be worth the effort. A method that once solved a problem may now create one. Abandonment can be practical rather than tragic. This is where gentle humor enters. Modern observers often speak of ancient builders as if they were absent-minded geniuses who accidentally forgot to write things down, as if the people who constructed monumental architecture somehow misplaced the instructions on the way home. The humor lies in the assumption itself. Ancient people did not forget. They chose not to continue. Repetition is expensive. It consumes time, labor, and focus. If a skill no longer serves a clear purpose, continuing it becomes indulgent. The ancient world was not sentimental about technique. If something stopped mattering, it stopped being practiced. Knowledge was not hoarded for its own sake. This perspective reframes the idea of mysterious technologies. What appears mysterious now often appeared ordinary then. The mystery is not how something was done. The mystery is why it stopped being done. And the answer is usually mundane. A quarry closes. A trade route shifts. A material becomes scarce. A social structure changes. The technique no longer fits. No ceremony marks its end. The last person who knows how simply grows old and teaches something else instead. Late at night, this pattern feels almost comforting. There is no conspiracy, no hidden vault of forbidden knowledge, just people responding sensibly to their circumstances. Technologies arise, rest, and sometimes sleep indefinitely. Skills sleeping is not the same as skills being lost forever. Dormant techniques can re-emerge when conditions align again. This has happened repeatedly throughout history. Roman concrete rediscovered, ancient pigments reanalyzed, old alloys reproduced. Knowledge wakes when attention returns. Yet waking knowledge is not trivial. It requires patience equal to that which created it originally. Modern reconstructions often fail, not because ancient techniques were impossible, but because modern expectations rush them. We attempt to compress learning that once unfolded across lifetimes. This compression creates frustration. We assume efficiency should substitute for familiarity. It cannot. Familiarity takes time. Repetition cannot be skipped. Across civilizations, the pattern remains steady. Technologies survive when traditions persist. They fade when repetition ends. Not because people became less capable, but because capability moved elsewhere. The unsettling realization is that progress is not cumulative by default. It is selective. History does not store everything. It keeps only what is actively used. Everything else rests quietly, waiting for interest to return. In a sleep version telling, this realization softens rather than alarms. There is no urgency to rescue everything, no obligation to resurrect every technique. Some knowledge has earned its rest. The past does not demand recovery, it offers perspective. It reminds us that intelligence does not always accelerate. Sometimes it pauses, sometimes it repeats, sometimes it lets go. Across civilizations, the pattern is not loss, but rhythm. Knowledge appears, works, and steps aside. The silence that follows is not absence, it is rest. And as this understanding settles, the mind can rest too. No mystery to solve, no secret to uncover, only patterns repeating gently across time, doing exactly what they have always done. Top of form. The difference between fact and decoration, when truth refuses to perform. What separates fact from legend is rarely excitement. It is documentation, context, and restraint. Three qualities that do not perform well on a stage and do not travel easily through rumor. Truth tends to arrive without music, without dramatic lighting, and without the courtesy of a satisfying reveal. It simply stands there, ordinary and unbothered, waiting to be noticed by anyone patient enough to look closely. Legend, by contrast, is decorative by nature. It dresses itself in mystery, sharp edges, and urgency, because decoration survives attention better than accuracy ever could. In the study of ancient technologies, this distinction matters more than people often realize. Many of the most reliable, impactful achievements of the ancient world sound almost disappointing when described honestly. They lack spectacle, they do not glow, hum, or defy gravity. They are systems refined slowly, documented imperfectly, and repeated until they worked consistently enough to disappear into daily life. They do not announce themselves as marvels. They simply function. Late at night, when the noise of extraordinary claims softens, this becomes easier to accept. Truth does not compete for attention. It does not escalate. It does not try to be memorable. It allows misunderstanding rather than exaggerate itself for clarity. And because of that, it is often mistaken for absence. Legend fills that perceived absence eagerly. Documentation is the first dividing line. Fact leaves traces. Not necessarily dramatic ones, but consistent ones. Inscriptions, tool marks, repair layers, repeated patterns of use. These are not glamorous forms of evidence. They do not point dramatically to a single conclusion. They accumulate slowly, suggesting what was done by showing how often it was done the same way. Legend prefers singular objects and isolated anomalies. One artifact, one unusual shape, one ambiguous fragment. Decoration thrives on the exception. Truth thrives on repetition. Context is the second line. A technology does not exist alone. It belongs to an environment, a culture, a set of needs, and a pattern of behavior. When an object is removed from that context, it becomes suggestive. When returned to it, it becomes ordinary. This is deeply inconvenient for storytelling. A gear found inside a shipwreck feels exciting. A gear found alongside dozens of similar tools, half-finished calculations, and worn surfaces feels mundane. The difference is not knowledge. It is patience. Restraint is the final and most uncomfortable boundary. Truth resists filling gaps. When evidence stops, truth stops with it. Legend accelerates precisely at that point. Where information ends, imagination begins running. This is not inherently malicious. Humans are pattern-seeking. We prefer closure. Legend offers it generously. Truth offers silence. There is a mild, almost affectionate irony here. The ancient world is often accused of mysticism, yet it is modern audiences who struggle most with uncertainty. Faced with incomplete evidence, ancient people often accepted "we do not know" as a stable condition. Modern viewers find this intolerable. We decorate the unknown rather than sit with it. This decoration is not limited to fringe theories. It appears subtly even in respectable retellings. Language shifts. Possibly becomes likely. Unclear becomes hidden. Unknown function becomes forgotten purpose. These changes feel small, but they matter. They transform caution into confidence without adding information. Legend grows in the space between words. The most reliable ancient technologies resist this transformation because they are boring when described accurately. Roman roads lasted because of layered stone and drainage, not because of secret formulas. Greek astronomy advanced through observation and calculation, not prophecy. Water management systems worked because of slope and gravity, not alignment with stars. These explanations do not thrill. They endure. There is gentle humor in how often this disappoints modern expectations. People lean forward, waiting for revelation, and receive maintenance instead. They expect brilliance and are handed consistency. It feels anticlimactic, like discovering that a miracle diet consists of eating reasonably and sleeping enough. The late-night tone suits this realization well. In quiet hours, the desire for spectacle relaxes. The mind becomes more tolerant of systems that work without drama. Truth feels less obligated to entertain. It becomes enough that something functioned reliably for a long time. Legend, meanwhile, grows restless without an audience. It needs reaction. It inflates details to keep attention. It frames ordinary decisions as extraordinary genius or catastrophic loss. Fact does not mind being overlooked. It has already done its job. This is why the most accurate descriptions of ancient technology often feel underwhelming. They lack narrative arcs. There is no sudden breakthrough, only incremental refinement. A tool improves slightly, then slightly again. A method becomes standard, then invisible. Eventually, it stops being discussed because it stops failing. Decoration cannot survive that process. It requires novelty. It prefers discontinuity. Legend loves to ask, how could they possibly do this? Fact responds, they did it the same way, many times. What makes this unsettling is how closely it mirrors modern life. The technologies we rely on most are not the ones we marvel at. They are the ones we forget to notice until they break. Plumbing, power grids, data protocols. They are invisible precisely because they work. Ancient technologies were no different. The difference between fact and decoration is not intelligence. It is discipline. It is the willingness to accept that the past was competent without being magical, that people solved problems patiently rather than brilliantly. That repetition mattered more than inspiration. In sleep version storytelling, this becomes a release rather than a loss. There is no need to chase mystery, no pressure to resolve every question. The story slows into observation. Tools wear down. Repairs happen quietly. Knowledge circulates without announcement. Truth rests comfortably in that space. It does not rush to convince. It allows legend to shout itself tired. And when attention fades, truth remains unchanged, waiting. As the night deepens, the difference becomes clearer. Fact does not glitter. It does not ask for belief. It simply works or it does not. And when it works consistently and without complaint, it earns the rare privilege of being ignored. That, perhaps, is the highest compliment any technology can receive. Top of form. When knowledge chooses to remain ordinary. Why most ancient technology was never meant to be remembered. One of the quietest misunderstandings about ancient technology is the assumption that it was designed to impress the future. Modern observers often approach the past with a kind of retrospective hunger, scanning ruins and artifacts for signs of hidden brilliance, secret superiority, or lost revolutions. Yet most ancient technologies were never intended to be remembered at all. Their success depended precisely on their ability to disappear into daily life, becoming so familiar that no one felt the need to describe them, document them, or preserve them for admiration. When a technique worked reliably, it stopped being interesting. And once it stopped being interesting, it stopped being recorded. This is where modern imagination tends to intervene. Gaps in the record feel uncomfortable. Silence is interpreted as loss rather than satisfaction. We assume that if something remarkable existed, someone would have written about it in detail, celebrated it, or warned others about its power. But history suggests the opposite. The most dependable techniques often leave the fewest traces because they generate no urgency. They produce no crisis. They solve problems quietly and repeatedly, allowing societies to function without pause. In that sense, invisibility becomes a sign of success, not absence. Consider how knowledge moves when it is held primarily in bodies rather than texts. A technique passed through demonstration does not require explanation. Hands learn pressure, eyes learn timing, muscles remember sequence. When such knowledge circulates through daily repetition, writing becomes optional. The skill exists as long as people continue to do it. The moment repetition ends, the knowledge does not vanish dramatically. It simply goes to sleep. No collapse is required, no catastrophe, just disuse. This is why so many ancient technologies feel tantalizingly incomplete to modern researchers. We are looking for instructions where none were ever needed. We want blueprints where there were routines. We search for manuals in cultures that relied on apprenticeship, imitation, and long familiarity with materials. The absence of explanation is not proof of secrecy or loss. Often, it is proof that the explanation felt unnecessary to those involved. There is mild irony here. The more spectacular a technology appears to us, the more likely it was never considered special by its users. Roman concrete was not a marvel, it was a building habit. The Antikythera Mechanism was not magic, it was a tool for people who already understood the sky. Glassmakers did not marvel at color shifts, they refined them. Engineers did not announce steam principles, they demonstrated them briefly and moved on. What we call advanced, they often called sufficient. This difference in perspective explains why so many ancient techniques did not scale into industrial revolutions. It is tempting to frame this as missed opportunity. Why did steam not transform the ancient world? Why did precision gearing not lead to mechanical dominance? But this question assumes that progress must follow a single path toward acceleration. Ancient societies did not measure success by growth curves or output graphs. They measured it by stability. A technique that met existing needs without disrupting social balance had no incentive to expand further. Innovation, when it occurred, was absorbed cautiously, not exploited aggressively. In many cases, restraint was the point. Scaling a technology introduces new risks: resource strain, labor disruption, social imbalance. Ancient systems were often designed to remain within limits that preserved continuity. When a tool threatened to exceed those limits, it was treated as a curiosity rather than a foundation. This is not technological failure. It is cultural choice. Another reason ancient technologies appear to vanish is that materials themselves decay selectively. Organic components rot. Metals corrode. Wood disappears. What survives tends to be stone, ceramics, and fragments that once played supporting roles rather than central ones. The core processes, the gestures, timings, and judgments, leave no durable footprint. Archaeology recovers outcomes, not habits, and habits are where most technology actually lived. Modern narratives often imagine ancient knowledge as fragile, easily lost in a single event. A library burned, a city fell, a secret died with its keeper. While such events did occur, they are rarely sufficient explanations on their own. Knowledge usually fades through neglect rather than destruction. When conditions change, climate, economy, belief, population, certain techniques stop being useful. Once usefulness ends, repetition ends. And without repetition, skill dissolves quietly. There is no villain in this story, only changing priorities. This is especially true for technologies that required long training but offered no decisive advantage under new circumstances. A society facing different pressures does not preserve techniques out of sentimentality. It preserves what continues to solve problems efficiently. Everything else becomes optional, then obsolete, then invisible. Later observers encounter the residue and mistake, quiet abandonment for mystery. The modern fascination with lost technologies often reveals more about contemporary anxiety than ancient reality. We live in a culture that fears fragility. We worry that progress is unstable, that knowledge can disappear suddenly, that complexity may exceed our control. Ancient technologies become screens onto which these fears are projected. If the past could lose something valuable, so might we. The myth reassures us by dramatizing loss, turning gradual change into sudden catastrophe. But the historical pattern is calmer. Technologies do not usually vanish, they rest. They wait for conditions that make them useful again. Some are rediscovered, others are reinvented independently. When this happens, the process feels miraculous only because we have forgotten how often it has already occurred. Innovation repeats because material constraints repeat. Stone behaves the same, water flows the same, heat expands the same. People notice the same patterns when they pay attention long enough. In this light, ancient technology appears less mysterious and more human. It reflects attentiveness rather than brilliance, familiarity rather than genius. Its greatest achievements were not hidden machines or secret sciences, but systems that allowed people to live predictably within their environments. These systems succeeded precisely because they did not demand constant explanation or celebration. They became background, and background rarely survives as evidence. For late-night history, this realization softens the narrative. There is no need to dramatize disappearance. Knowledge did not fall off a cliff. It drifted. Skills went quiet. Tools returned to dust. The world continued functioning. People adapted. New routines replaced old ones. The past did not mourn itself, it moved on. And perhaps this is the most unsettling truth of all, that greatness does not announce its departure. It does not leave a note. It It does not insist on remembrance. It simply stops being practiced. The silence that follows is not a void, but a rest. In the slow hours of listening, this perspective allows the mind to loosen its grip on mystery. The past does not need to be rescued or romanticized. It can be allowed to remain ordinary. Techniques once used with confidence do not demand rediscovery. They remind us instead that knowledge is less about preservation than participation. What matters is not what was lost, but what continues to be practiced now, quietly, without spectacle, repeating itself until it no longer needs explanation. Top of form. Why the truth does not need to shout. In the quiet accounting of history, truth rarely raises its voice. It does not announce itself with spectacle, nor does it compete with legend for attention. When all fragments are gathered, three groups remain clearly visible. There are technologies confirmed by evidence, supported by tools, wear marks, and repeated success. There are techniques once known, later thinned by secrecy, interrupted teaching, or traditions that simply stopped being practiced. And there are ideas that remain appealing, imaginative, and elegantly phrased, yet unsupported by context, documentation, or necessity. These categories are not moral judgments. They are conditions of survival. What lasted did so because it worked calmly, repeatedly, and well enough to fade into routine without needing to be remembered loudly over long stretches of ordinary time. Ancient people did not require mystery in order to achieve remarkable things. They required time, repetition, and memory held in hands, rather than preserved in explanation. Skills survived when bodies remembered them. Knowledge endured when it was practiced daily instead of celebrated occasionally. This is mildly inconvenient for modern storytelling, which prefers revelation over maintenance and secrets over schedules. There is gentle humor in realizing that much of ancient brilliance was simply consistency performed without complaint. No lost spark, no vanished genius, just people doing something carefully until it stopped feeling difficult. Truth does not shout because it has nothing to prove. It continues working whether it is admired, doubted, or quietly ignored across centuries, landscapes, tools, weather, fatigue, and change without instruction or applause. As the night settles, thought naturally slows and detail softens. Gears turn without hurry, concrete rests and heals small fractures silently. Glass shifts color when light asks it to. Steam spins politely, demonstrating a principle rather than demanding an industry. None of these things insist on wonder. They invite it, briefly, then return to usefulness. Lost technologies, when examined honestly, become gentler than rumor suggests. They stop being dramatic absences and become quiet reminders of how easily skills sleep when repetition ends. History, in this moment, feels less like a warning and more like a long breath passing by, unconcerned with being impressive. It remains patient, steady, uninterested in applause, comfortable with silence, and willing to wait until curiosity matures again in future listening minds. In the late, quiet hours, this understanding settles without effort. There is no need to decide what was miraculous and what was mundane. The past does not require rescue by exaggeration. It asks only for attention, patience, and restraint. When truth is allowed to rest, legend loses its urgency. What remains is balance. Motion slows. Questions loosen their grip. The story does not end with a conclusion, but with stillness. a pause long enough to be felt, a calm where thinking becomes lighter and certainty becomes unnecessary. History passes by without hurry, and nothing important is lost in that softness. Sleep arrives similarly, gently, when effort steps aside, and rhythm remains, breathing slowly, evenly, until awareness fades on its own without force, urgency, or noise.